Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Joining us today will be recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine and the Wolverine ON3. First, my view from Section 17. I thought we'd be able to enjoy this bye week and get ready for the stretch run, but that's not going to happen. I had just finished editing my interview with EJ and was getting ready to drop this show when all you-know-what broke loose. As we all know by now, Pete Thamel from ESPN broke a story based on an insider leak from the NCAA. You got to wonder why that's happening and now, but it is what it is. According to the story, analyst Connor Stalions reportedly purchased tickets in his name to multiple games involving future Michigan opponents over the past 3 years. The report also alleges an opposing Big Ten school scanned in-stadium surveillance video from a game earlier this year and found an individual in the seat purchased by Stallion filming the sidelines the entire game with his smartphone. It was reported that Stallions makes $55,000 a year, so just how he funded the operation, if indeed it was an operation, or who else funded it, and how the information was relayed and used is at the crux of the matter. We don't have all the facts. I mean, this was a leaked story, so we have to stand by. As of late Monday afternoon when we released this show, there has been no official reply from the University of Michigan, so it will be an interesting few days to say the least. This has already damaged the reputation of Jim Harbaugh and the program, just the allegations, and has cast a shadow on what has been and still is a very good season and football team. So again, we can only wait and see how this story develops in the coming days. Getting back to my guest today, I thought the bye week would be the perfect time to catch up on what's happening with our recruiting class of 2024. So we'll air the interview with EJ because there is still a lot of interesting stuff we talked about. We did touch on the sign stealing story, but as I've just said, we taped the interview before the ESPN story broke. So up next is recruiting insider EJ Holland from the Wolverine Magazine and the Wolverine ON3. So stay with us. With us on the show during bye week is EJ Holland, who covers recruiting for the Wolverine Magazine, the Wolverine.com, and Wolverine ON3. EJ, it's great to have you back with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, before we catch up on what's happening on the recruiting scene here on the bye week, just wanted to get your thoughts on Saturday night's game, what we saw against the Spartans. It really was a Michigan team that was so locked in, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of expected. It was a really bad Michigan State game. I guess a Michigan State team, I guess anything can happen in a rivalry game, but I think it was kind of expected for Michigan to steamroll them, and Michigan State had a couple of mutual targets on campus from a recruiting perspective, so it was good for those guys to get a chance to see Michigan play and dominate, and a lot of positive buzz coming out of that. Against the Spartans, I think it helps with some of the in-state guys as well.
Yeah, and what I have to admit to after watching Saturday night's game is, when the season started, I took a wait-and-see attitude when the Jim and the staffers and a lot of media were saying JJ had taken his play to another level. I guess I'm convinced now he is in complete command of the offense, and that laser passing show on Saturday night it really was amazing to watch, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for JJ as a person that covered him for so long at the high school level. Seeing what he's blossomed into at the collegiate level has been really fun to watch, especially at Michigan, where he's been putting up numbers, kind of changing even from a recruiting standpoint as well, just changing the view of the offense. I think getting more recruits excited about, the passing game at Michigan and what it's become. And I think Harbaugh has kind of stood by that, more of a 50-50 split between the run and the pass game. And you're seeing him allow JJ to be JJ, and JJ's excelling, and he's always at his best when you just let him run around and, have fun. And, the kid just loves football. He loves his teammates. And, I know he's the front runner for the Heisman Trophy now as far as odds are concerned. But, JJ never talked about that during the process. It was always about changing the culture at Michigan, winning a national championship. That's been his goal since, he committed to Michigan. So I think he's in the process of doing that, and the individual accolades are fun for him, as they would be for anybody. But I think he's always been locked in on winning a national championship at Michigan.
Well, it's been a lot of fun to watch him so far. And, of course, the next 4 games, he will have his chance to do what he can for that Heisman Trophy award. There's no doubt about that. Interesting stat, though, I saw after the game. Michigan's defense has scored more touchdowns than they have allowed, which is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, defense has a lot of great pieces as well. I mean, a guy that came in with JJ was Junior Colson, kind of built in the same mold, and, he had a really strong game over the weekend. And, just from an overall perspective, Jesse Minter's done a fantastic job since taking over as defensive coordinator, picking up, where Mike McDonald left off. And I think Minter, you could argue, has done an even better job than McDonald on the field. And he's also a plus on the recruiting trail. Mike McDonald was a guy that was putting in a lot of effort and was a great evaluator and was really trying hard to pick up the college recruiting game. With Jesse Minter, he's already been an experienced recruiter, and I think he's really helped Michigan on the trail as well. So I think he's, a rising star in college football. And obviously you're seeing that, from the Michigan defense and the production and results they've been having. I mean, every game's been a blowout, and I don't know. I don't think teams have scored more than, 10 points or something crazy. I mean, it's it's a fantastic job from Jesse.
Well, of course, this is the bye week, so we can take a breath as a fan base until the Purdue game. And, of course, the team will work on improving, as Jim likes to say, during this bye week. So I suppose we won't be able to avoid, though, the talk about the sign-stealing situation, the in-person scouting, whatever it is the NCAA is looking at. The reality of all of this is this whole NCAA investigation could take months or even longer to really develop, couldn't it, EJ?
Yeah, it's another, I guess, witch hunt, if you want to call it. I don't think it's going to have any impact from a recruiting trail standpoint. I was actually out on the road over the weekend. I saw 3 commits. I saw Devin Baxter, Dominic Nichols, and Owen Waitful, and my coworker, Zach Libby, was out in Vegas seeing Micah Kaapana, and everybody just kind of had the same response. All the commits are locked in. They're not letting this affect them at all. they also think it's kind of a witch hunt as well. I think Owen Wafel kind of gave the best response. He's like, everybody just loves to hate Michigan. And I think that's kind of the feeling amongst the team and amongst the recruits. So I don't think it's going to have any impact from a recruiting standpoint. From a team standpoint, this is, like you said, one of those things that could drag on forever, and you just never really know what can come of it. I think this coupled with the Burgergate thing has been a complete farce. And, I know Connor Stallions, and, obviously he's kind of the scapegoat of all of this, or at the very least at the center of all of this. And I mean, he's a good guy. He's done nothing but great things for the program since arriving. I know he's a Michigan loyalist, and, he's helped Michigan from a recruiting standpoint, a scouting standpoint, an NIL standpoint. He's a guy that recently was promoted to linebacker analyst, so he's gotten some work on the field as well. I thought he was one of the, guys that, from a non-coaching perspective was a rising star and had a chance to wear multiple hats at Michigan. And I guess it just so happens he's also an amazing sign stealer, which isn't illegal. But he's a veteran as well. So shout out to Connor for serving the country. But I think that he's, I think Connor's done everything the right way since being here. And like I said, he's not only a Michigan loyalist, but he's also a Harbaugh loyalist. I don't think he would go out of his way to defy Harbaugh and, do something that was with malicious intent. So, I'm interested to see how all of this plays out. But, unless it has a direct impact later on Harbaugh's future and makes him look at NFL options more, I don't think too much of it right now.
No, and we'll hear plenty about it in the coming weeks. But let's get back to recruiting right now, which is what you do so well there at the Wolverine On3. Last week, you did a deep dive piece into the recruiting battle between LSU and Michigan for five-star Belleville quarterback Bryce Underwood. And I get so many questions about him, but do you get a vibe he's leaning one way or the other right now?
If I had to make a pick today, if you were like, hey, EJ, make one today, October 23rd, I would say LSU. He's coming off a really strong visit there. He's always had a wandering eye for the SEC. Jaden Daniels is having a great season for the Tigers. Joe Sloan, their offensive coordinator, has done a fantastic job of, providing on-field results for that offense, as well as recruiting Underwood. Brian Kelly has Midwest ties. So I think there's a lot of positive momentum going on with LSU. On the flip side of the coin, I think Kurt Campbell has done a great job of recruiting Underwood. He was at Underwood's game on Friday night. He's definitely been an upgrade over, Matt Weiss. So, I think Michigan's still very much in it. The biggest reason I would put LSU ahead of Michigan right now is I have, a couple of reasons. One, I would have a little more faith in their NIL program. And two, he just hasn't visited Michigan this season. I know Bryce has been to Michigan 1,000 times, so it really doesn't matter all that much. But still, you'd like to see him get to campus, get back into the game day atmosphere after taking some other visits, especially after the, LSU visit high. That's why, if I made a pick today, he still hasn't visited Michigan this season. So I think getting him back on campus, getting him in the atmosphere is a big house again, getting him around guys that he knows on the team, like Will Johnson, who's having a terrific year on the defensive side of the ball, getting him around J.J. McCarthy, who has helped Michigan in this recruitment and has always been such a great ambassador for the program, getting him around some of the commits that he knows, including his teammate Jeremiah Beasley, just getting him in the program again, getting him, feeling like part of the family, which Michigan does so well, and then answering any questions he has left, having him sit down with Jim Harbaugh again, face to face. He hasn't been able to do that since the barbecue in July. And, he's been able to do that at LSU, obviously, with his most recent visit. So getting him to actually have face-to-face communication with Jim Harbaugh. Kurt Campbell can do a great job, and he's a key piece to the puzzle. But I think the guy that's going to close this recruitment is Jim Harbaugh himself. So having that one-on-one with him before he makes that decision in January will be key. And, figuring out an NIL plan for Underwood. We've heard some buzz that Michigan's trying to do what it can. They don't want another Dante Moore situation. They understand that Bryce Underwood is not just a generational prospect at the most important position in college football, but also a local kid. So you don't want him to leave the backyard, and you have to do something special in that regard. And I think Michigan's done a great job with NIL when it comes to the team, when it comes to transfer portal. So transfer portal and roster retention have been at the elite level, but recruiting, I think they still haven't really figured out the best approach there. I think they need to do that for Bryce Underwood.
This fall, though, we've seen quarterback Jaden Davis stock dropping among recruiting analysts from most services that I've seen. Talk about that and why you think, at least nationally, the perception of Jaden is changing.
Yeah, I've had the same opinion of Jaden Davis since last year, which, I have to mention all the time. Yeah, I like many of the services, had Jaden Davis graded very high as a sophomore. When Michigan first offered Davis, I thought this is a 5-star level kid. He's going to grow a couple of inches. He's going to become more athletic. He's going to keep improving on some of his faults, improving on his arm strength, and he has the it factor. I mean, he's been groomed to be a quarterback since he was a middle schooler. He's worked with top quarterback trainers across the country. He now plays at a Providence Day program where Chad Greer was a college quarterback himself, the head coach there. He's also the father of Will Greer, who is, a highly touted quarterback at the collegiate level and spent some time in the NFL. He spent the offseason traveling with Cam Newton, who needs no introduction. So, he's been built to be a quarterback, basically, built to be a high-level quarterback. But I think sometimes when you are that type of guy, you can peak a little early at the high school level, and you don't necessarily, mature as much as some of the people around you from a physical standpoint and just a playing standpoint as well sometimes. I mean, you see it in youth football all the time. You'll see this monstrous kid, and then, they get to high school and the monstrous kid isn't so monstrous anymore. I think with Jaden Davis over the last couple of years, he kind of hasn't progressed as expected. He's still a sub 6'1" quarterback. I mean, he's right at about 6 foot, maybe. He still has, above average arm strength, but nothing special to make up for that. He's not very mobile at all. He's not Cade McNamara in the sense that he's a statue and he can't, evade some pass rush here and there or rush for, 5-6 yards if Michigan really needs it. But he's definitely not a threat with his legs. And usually when you're a sub 6'1" quarterback, you need to make up for that with some type of special tool, right? And so he doesn't have that Bryce Underwood level arm strength, and he's not a threat with his legs. So, people will point to Kyler Murray, who I covered extensively at the high school level. Kyler Murray is one of the greatest rushing quarterbacks of all time. Or people will point to Bryce Young, who didn't put up a ton of rushing numbers at Alabama, but was a 1,000-yard rusher at the high school level and was just an absolute master at being a Houdini in and out of the pocket and being a creator. Jaden Davis isn't a creator. What he is he's a very high-level distributor. He's a very accurate passer, short to intermediate. He can occasionally hit the deep ball. It's beautiful when he does. It flutters for him when he doesn't. So he still has an inconsistent deep ball, but he is capable of making, an occasional high-level throw downfield. But I think where Jaden Davis is at his best is being in a controlled offense like Michigan's, a pro-style offense where he can dink and dunk all day long. He can be accurate in that short to intermediate range. He can process things well. He's a really smart football player. He's very studious as well. He does a lot of film breakdown. He understands the game, from an in-depth standpoint. So I think he's a really good fit for what Michigan does. And I think people need to realize that just because he's not a 5-star, and he's dropping in the rankings into that 100, 200 range, you know, I still think that makes him a very, very good player. He's still a guy that's ranked in the upper echelon of players across the country. He can still have a lot of success at Michigan, and I think that boosts his profile as well, just going to a place that will play to his strengths.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Jaden Davis isn't going to be a dynamic game breaker. He's not going to be Kyler Murray. He's not going to throw an 80-yard bomb like Bryce Underwood. Like, that's just not who he is. He's not going to run for first downs and do crazy things like J.J. McCarthy. You know, he's not going to feed the ball between three defenders and make you go, wow. He's just going to gradually lead your teams down the football field and be a really high-level distributor. You know, Michigan can win with guys like that. If he can be a better version of Cade McNamara, there's no reason why Michigan can't have success with Jaden Davis at the helm, as long as they continue to have a strong run game and a great defense. And if Michigan has those two things, Jaden Davis would be just fine in Ann Arbor. And I know people like to point at stats, but stats, you know, Jaden Davis has been having a great year statistically, but he hasn't shown more mobility. He hasn't shown more athleticism. He hasn't shown a more consistent deep ball. And he still has, you know, some mechanical flaws as well. But you can't just hear me say that and also ignore everything I just said about what makes him a really, really good quarterback. Because the bottom line is, this is a kid still ranked between 100 and 200 that's very good. And he can still have a lot of success at Michigan. And that's all Michigan fans should really care about. So regardless if he's ranked, you know, number 25 in the country or number 190 in the country, this is still a kid that can have a lot of success at Michigan. He's still one of the better quarterbacks in a very historically weak year at quarterback. And I think when you look at quarterbacks across the country, it's a bad year. So I think Michigan went out and instead of taking an upside guy, they found a really, really high floor guy because they've missed the last two couple of cycles. You look at Michigan's quarterback recruiting the last couple of cycles, you've had project guys like Jaden Benegal and Alex Orji. You need a true quarterback that has that high floor, and Jaden Davis is that in a sea of 2024 quarterbacks that just aren't at that elite level.
Well, earlier this fall, we lost the commits of two four-star edge guys, Jacob Smith and Elias Rudolph. I know we've extended an offer to Deshaun Warner from Arizona, who is a Kansas commit right now. He hasn't been on campus for a visit yet, has he, EJ?
No, not yet. You know, the edge board is still kind of getting sorted out. You know, like you mentioned, they lost two pass rushers in Elias Rudolph and Jacob Smith. I think Jacob Smith just wanted to be a little closer to home. Him and his family moved back to Kentucky, so both he and his twin brother Gerard flipped from Michigan to Kentucky. I don't think they will flip back. Elias Rudolph, you know, Michigan's still working on him. Obviously, he flipped to Miami, and Miami has a really strong NIL program. Or, you know, if you don't want to call it a strong program, you can just say they operate differently than Michigan from an NIL standpoint. And so, you know, that's something that's going to be tough to overcome. But Rudolph has been open to visiting Michigan. They're trying to get him on campus next month, whether it's for the Purdue game or the Ohio State game. He still has a great relationship with lead recruiter Steve Klinskell, who has strong ties in the state of Ohio. So he's still in play. You know, they offered Deshaun Warner, and like you said, he's committed to Kansas. I think that's going to be a little tougher of a flip than initially thought, not just for Michigan, but for Ohio State. It seems like he's been very loyal to Kansas, despite both, you know, Big Ten powers coming into his recruitment. So we'll see if Michigan can get him on campus. And you know, I've been told the Wolverines are going to spend a lot of the bye week evaluating potential edge targets. You know, I know they like Joseph Anderson, who's a three-star prospect committed to Iowa. I know they like Mason Carter, who's another three-star prospect committed to Vanderbilt. So, you know, there's some names out there that Michigan has been evaluating, but I think they're really going to sit down as a staff and figure out who are some other guys they can pursue at that position, because they do want another pass rusher. in this class. And I think the ideal pass rusher they're looking for is more of a thinner speed rusher. You have Dominic Nichols and Devin Baxter committed already, and both of those guys have the frame. Both of those guys are already at more than 230 pounds and have the frames to add a lot of weight. So they're looking at guys that are more maybe in the 200 to 220 pound range right now. They want, thinner, speedy pass rushers. So they're taking a look at that throughout the week.
It's really interesting because as a fan, when you watch Michigan's defense, if you try to put yourself in the place of some of these really highly recruited, highly touted edge rushers, you would think if they're watching, they would say, is there a better place to go and play if you're an edge rusher? But when you look at some of the kids that we've lost out on, like Jacob Smith, the Smith brothers, geography is still a big player in all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, geography plays a role in it. I think that NIL obviously plays a role in it. I mean, when you think about NIL, you think about the skills, you think about quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers. But, if you're talking about premium positions, offensive tackle and pass rushers, right? Those guys are going to be commanding a ton of NIL as well. So I think that's, put a damper on things a little bit as well. So, yeah, you could make the argument for geography. You could make the argument for NIL. You could make the argument that Michigan already had its guys, and now it's late in the cycle and they're having to scramble around, and it's not necessarily their fault in a sense because they thought those were going to be the four that were coming in, and it just didn't work out that way.
Well, EJ, you recently made a swing through Texas and broke down your visit on the Wolverine On3. You mentioned that Michigan commit Blake Frazier has that it factor, and I've been watching as much tape of him as I can, and that kid looks like a beast already, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget about Blake Frazier because he's a legacy recruit, right? And you think about a legacy recruit and you're like, all right, that's just Steve Frazier's son, or, that's just the kid who always grew up around Michigan, and he was a really good player. But I think Blake Frazier is one of the elite offensive linemen in the 2024 recruiting class. I think regardless if he's a legacy or not, I mean, obviously it helps Michigan that he's a legacy because that's a big reason he committed. But if this kid weren't a Michigan legacy, if he were just some random kid down in Austin, I mean, I think Michigan fans might be even more excited, which is kind of weird to say. You'd feel like they'd be more excited about legacy. But I think he, on his own merit, isn't just a legacy recruit. He's a legitimate top 150 offensive tackle, top 150 recruit nationally, one of the top 15 offensive tackles in the country, in my opinion. And you see that on film, and you see that in the offer sheet. I mean, Blake Frazier was very highly touted. Clemson wanted him. Texas wanted him. Texas A&M made a big push. Florida made a big push before he committed to Michigan. Oregon had him on campus. So you're talking about some of the bigger programs in college football all wanted Blake Frazier. This wasn't just a legacy recruit with a couple offers here and there. I mean, he had offers from some of the biggest programs in college football. So he was a very wanted man before he committed to Michigan. And what you're seeing on tape as a senior has been really impressive. Blake's been continuing to add some really good weight. I think he has versatility along the offensive line. He can start off in the interior and work his way out. I think he'll eventually settle in as a right tackle. I think you have two really good tackles in this class. I think you have, Blake Frazier, who is a guy that, like I said, has that versatility and, that athletic upside. And then you have a, towering left tackle type in Andrew Sprague, who's 6'8", 295 pounds. So I think that duo will be the future of Michigan's offensive line. But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about Blake Frazier. I think Blake Frazier is one of the better commits in this class. And on top of that, being a legacy recruit, growing up around Michigan, he understands what it means to be, a Michigan man. I guess you should get him on the Michigan Man podcast. But he really knows what it takes to win at Michigan, to be part of the culture, what it means to represent the Block M and don the wing helmet and all that special stuff that comes with playing at the University of Michigan. Blake understands that. He's grown up around it. He's watched Michigan games since he was a kid. He's been to Ann Arbor since he was a kid. And, he just has that, personality, that JJ McCarthy type of personality. Even in the way he speaks, if you ever heard a Blake Frazier interview, he has kind of that same, the same cadence, the same, type of way he uses his words, and the way he talks about the program is very similar to JJ. So I think that Frazier is going to be a leader for the program, a future team captain, and I couldn't be more excited about him as a recruit.
In that same piece on your swing through Texas, you mentioned that Coach Ron Bellamy has also been making inroads with some pretty good receivers in the Lone Star State. Can you talk about some of those kids?
Yeah, Bellamy's made it a priority to go down south where he has roots. Obviously, he's from Louisiana, and I believe his wife is from, or at least has a lot of family in the Dallas area as well. So, he has Southern ties, and he's really been trying to make inroads, as you said, down in the state of Texas. And, I spent my week in Dallas taking care of some family stuff and also seeing recruits. But, yeah, a couple guys down there that he's really high on. One is Taz Williams out of Red Oak, Texas, which is just south of Dallas. And, an interesting connection there. Taz Williams, who's a 4-star recruit, 6 foot, 180 pounds, can play in the slot or out wide. But an interesting connection that Bellamy has there is Taz Williams trains with Margin Hooks, who's one of the most talked about wide receiver trainers in the state of Texas and nationally. And Bellamy played with Hooks in the NFL and NFL Europe. So, they go way back. They're still close friends and keep in contact. So that's helped in the recruitment of Taz Williams. The other thing about Taz is he's not originally from Texas. He actually just moved there a couple of years ago. He's from Pittsburgh, and he worked out with the same training program as Michigan commit Cole Sullivan. So he has a tie there as well. Williams was on campus at Michigan this spring, and he's looking to return for the game against Ohio State if his playoff schedule allows. So, Bellamy has a couple of ties there and is definitely making an impact on Williams. And another kid that, they have good ties with is Kalik Lockett out of Garland, Sac, which is just east of Dallas. And Lockett's already been to campus twice. And the connection there is, Sac produced Michigan quarterback Alex Orji. And Lockett was actually on the varsity as a freshman. So he had a chance to play a full year with Orji. They're still really good friends. In fact, Orji spends some of his week breaking down Lockett's film and going over, film with him and just critiquing his game, telling him, what they can do better for the next week. And so I thought that was pretty cool that they're still that close of friends. And, Orji's been recruiting Lockett really hard to Michigan. And like I said, he's already visited twice. So I think they're making some really good progress with both of those wide receivers. And in Dallas, and then out in the Houston area is the big fish, Andrew Marsh, the number 5 wide receiver in the country out of Katy, Jordan. Marsh has already been to campus twice, including for the barbecue at the Big House. He has the usual suspects after him. Down south, Texas, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas A&M. But I think Bellamy has done a really nice job there, and Marsh is looking to come back for the game against Ohio State as well. So, those 3 receivers definitely come to mind from the Lone Star State that Bellamy has done a fantastic job.
Well, circling back to edge rusher prospects, a few minutes ago, we talked about Deshaun Warner from Arizona, but you mentioned another edge prospect we like is Cheetah O'Philly from Garland, Texas. I know he's a Texas Tech commit right now, but you think there's a possibility that we could flip him, don't you?
Yeah, they obviously haven't offered anybody except for Warner, but, Cheetah O'Philly is one the staff is aware of and one that they are taking a look at. And, I talked about Kalik Lockett being at Saxey. Cheetah O'Philly is at Saxey as well. And having that Alex Orji connection, I think, can help a lot. He's currently committed to Texas Tech. On3 is very high on O'Philly. They have him ranked as a top 100 edge nationally, in the 2024 class. He fits the bill, as that speed rusher I was talking about, 6'4", 210 pounds, is right in that range of what they want. So, I think they're going to break down film of him this week and continue to look at him and others on the edge board as well.
Well, sticking with Texas, Coach Grant Newsom has also been working down there hard for a couple of tight ends. And, I mean, who wouldn't want to be a tight end at Michigan if you're a kid watching what we're seeing now? South Lake's Jack, and I'm not sure how you say this, Vandersailor, Lovejoy's Bear Tenney. It sounds like both of those kids are really high in Michigan, aren't they?
Yeah, Bear Tenney is a 3-star tight end, but his offer sheet definitely speaks more than his ranking. I mean, this is a kid with offers from Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. He just moved to the Dallas area literally a few months ago, right before the season started. He's originally from Arizona, and while living in Arizona, he made the trip out to Michigan for an unofficial visit. He told me he's in the process of finalizing plans to get back to Ann Arbor for the game against Purdue. So that's just a couple of weeks away. I think right now Michigan is very high on his list, along with Tennessee. I think those two schools are really moving the needle, as well as Auburn. So, yeah, I think Michigan has a great shot with Bear Tenney. Like I said, he's already been on campus once. He's, planning to be on campus here in the next few weeks. So he's one they could make a move with. And then Jack Vandersailor out of South Lake Carroll, which is one of the premier programs in the Dallas area, recently listed Michigan in his top 9. I think Texas right now is probably the team to beat, but he's open to looking at out-of-region schools. He has been building a great relationship with Grant Newsom, and I think that's going a long way. And usually South Lake Carroll kids are really open to leaving the state. They're definitely not afraid to leave the state of Texas, and they're definitely not NIL type of kids either. That's a very well-off community. And so I think Jack is a perfect candidate to look at for Michigan. I think they just have to get him on campus. He's never visited before, but it's clear that he has really high interest in the Wolverines.
Well, one of your observations that caught my interest was the quarterback you mentioned from down in Texas. And even though he's a 2026 kid, so down the road, Quinn Murphy from Austin, he's already visited Michigan. And you mentioned he's a name to know early on. So tell us about this kid.
Yeah, the city of Austin produces some great quarterbacks, whether it's, Drew Brees or Baker Mayfield or, the list goes on, out of Austin. They've had number 1 quarterbacks as well that haven't panned out, like Gilbert. So, Austin, Texas is kind of a mecca for quarterbacks. And I think Quinn Murphy is that next guy up. I mean, he already has an offer for Michigan. He visited in the summer, threw in front of Kurt Campbell and Jim Harbaugh, and they offered him on the spot. In fact, Michigan is already considered the leader on the On3 recruiting prediction machine. He's planning to make it back to Ann Arbor for the game against Ohio State. So this is a kid with really high interest in Michigan. And, coaches aren't able to reach out to 2026 recruits due to the NCAA rules, but Quinn Murphy's been very proactive in reaching out to Kurt Campbell and building a relationship with him. And so, Campbell has offered a handful of 2026 quarterbacks, including Murphy. And, I think there is some positive momentum with him early on both sides. I think, Campbell has legitimate interest in him, and Murphy definitely has legitimate interest in the program. So, looking forward to seeing him get back to campus twice, which for an out-of-region kid as a 2026, I mean, that's pretty impressive early on.
So as of today, On3 has Michigan with the number 14 class nationally, 4th in the Big Ten. We have 25 commits on board right now. How many more kids do you see us taking, and is there still a chance that this class could still end up in the top 10?
I think top 10 would probably be wishful thinking just because there isn't much room to add many more kids. I think that was the other part of your question. I don't think Michigan will get over 30. When you look at remaining needs, they still want a bigger bodied outside wide receiver. So that's one. they'd like to take another offensive lineman, but don't necessarily have to. So that's kind of iffy. They do want another defensive lineman, preferably a nose. So, you can count that. So that's 2. They definitely need an edge. That's 3. And they definitely need a safety. So that's 4. So that would put them at 29. And then if they do add another offensive lineman, or they decide to just take best available, if somebody shows really high interest late at a position that's not a need, they could certainly go that route. So I wouldn't put it at more than 30. I would say 29 is the most likely, with 30 probably being the maximum. So that's not a lot of room to really boost the ranking, right? So I think staying in the top 15 is probably the goal at this point. And you look at some of the teams behind Michigan, and that's going to be a tough challenge. I mean, Auburn has 16 commits, Clemson has 17, USC has 16, South Carolina has 16, and all 4 of the schools that I just mentioned have a higher commitment recruiting rating than Michigan in terms of average rating per recruit. So, yeah, I think it's going to be tough to just stay in the top 15 now. I think the pathway to top 10 would be flipping back Elias Rudolph, flipping Zaquan Patterson, who's a top 100 safety from Miami, landing someone that's really unexpected, that's highly touted, flipping Nitro Tuggle, who's a top 150 wide receiver committed to Georgia. All of those pieces would have to line up right. But even then, I think it's going to be tough to climb into the top 10. So probably looking at a top 15 finish ideally if you're Michigan.
Well, final question before we let you get away, EJ, and I'm sure you hear this from a lot of your readers. I know I get it from my listeners all the time, but after great success the last 2 years, a lot of us expected, top 10, maybe even top 5 classes. And I know there's no simple answers to, why that hasn't happened, but it is disappointing in so many ways, isn't it?
Yeah, me as someone that didn't grow up a Michigan fan is just kind of a recruiting fanatic. I mean, you have people ask me all the time, would you rather be at a college game or would you rather be at a high school game? And, I'll take the high school game 1,000 times out of 1,000. So looking at it from a pure recruiting fan standpoint, when you have a team that's a blue blood program that is competing in the college football playoff, potentially now for the 3rd straight year, when you have a head coach like Jim Harbaugh, who's done it at the NFL level as well, and when you have a school like Michigan that offers the academics that it does, it's a no-brainer that this should be a program consistently recruiting at the top 5 level. I covered Texas for as long as I've covered Michigan, and Texas, despite all those horrendous years that they had on the field, still found a way to recruit inside the top 10. I always felt like if Texas was able to turn that corner, which they never did, they would be landing, number 1, number 2, number 3 recruiting classes in the country. And up until the rise of NIL, right when Michigan was at, the point where they did turn the corner, I felt like that was going to be the case for Michigan. I was really excited. I felt like, oh man, I'm going to cover number 1, 2, 3 classes in the country. And it just hasn't panned out that way. And I think the biggest reason is because the, recruiting world has changed significantly with the rise of NIL. And Michigan hasn't really adapted on the recruiting front. We talked about it earlier, how Michigan is elite when it comes to roster retention and when it comes to, transfer portal, but not necessarily on the recruiting trail. And when you have teams like Georgia that's winning national championships and has the NIL, it's easy for them. When you have, Ohio State that has lost to Michigan in the last couple of years, but has been historically really, really good during these kids' lifetimes and has the NIL, it's going to be tough. So with Michigan being really good the past couple of years, but not having the NIL, I think that's really hindered them. And if you're not going to have the NIL aspect, I think all the little things need to be right, right at the top. So, Michigan still operates with a really small recruiting department. That shouldn't be the case at a place like Michigan. I think you see them lack that social media buzz that gets recruits excited. You saw it during the barbecue at the Big House. It felt like nobody would have even known the event was going on if it weren't for that crappy looking hot dog. So, just doing the little things right if you're not going to do NIL is something that Michigan should have already been doing. But I still think the biggest factor is NIL, and whether it's putting together that base salary model that Jim Harbaugh has been advocating for a long time, or just participating in NIL in some type of capacity. I mean, something obviously has to change from a recruiting perspective. And I know people will say, look, Michigan's great at developing talent. Just let them land the diamonds in the rough and let them recruit at a high level for players that are ranked between 100 and 300. And they'll occasionally get a back end top 100 recruit and be fine. Yeah, but, if you want Michigan to compete for national titles as this recruiting, world changes, you have to be able to adapt. And you as a Michigan fan, you should want the best for Michigan. You should expect Michigan to be the leaders and best, obviously, as the slogan goes. And so that means recruiting at a very, very high clip, which Michigan should be doing. So I don't think we can just accept that they're going to be pulling in top 15 to 20 classes, because that might not equate to this much success later on. Evaluating high school prospects is a tough business, and sometimes you're going to miss a lot. And so, Michigan has been fortunate to hit and develop, and I don't think it's just luck. Obviously the staff does a great job. Ben Herbert's one of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the entire country, but I also think you're making it harder than it needs to be, because you should be recruiting these high level players. I think with the culture that Jim Harbaugh has, if he was getting Ohio State type of classes, I hate to use Ohio State as an example, but they're consistently recruiting in the top 5. If you're getting Ohio State level type classes or Alabama type classes or Georgia type classes, and you have the culture and the development and the coaching that Jim Harbaugh has instilled over the last few years, I mean, you're talking about a potential dynasty at Michigan, right? And that's what I think should be the ultimate end goal. I mean, some of these schools like Ohio State, they don't have the culture. They're soft, obviously. They might not have the development or the coaching that Michigan does, and that's why they're not winning with those 5-star level players. Or they are winning, but they're not beating Michigan with those 5-star players. I think Michigan has the best of every world when it comes to coaching and development, and they can build, they can be the next Alabama in terms of being a recruiting juggernaut and being a consistent national championship winner. I really feel like Michigan can do that. There's no reason, if you're a Michigan fan, that you shouldn't think that Michigan is not capable of becoming an Alabama type of school. If they're willing to figure out NIL, the sky's the limit for Michigan.
Here with us today during the bye week, talking about what's always fascinating recruiting, is EJ Holland, who covers recruiting for the Wolverine Magazine and the Wolverine On3. EJ, always great to have you on the show. Probably be later, closer to the recruiting deadline, that we get you back, but we look forward to that visit.
Thanks, Mike. Less than 2 months away until signing day, so not too far away.
On Quick Hits today, there is no question that what has happened on the field this year is now being overshadowed by the Connor Stallion story. By the time we join you next week, who knows where we'll be, so stay tuned. Next Tuesday, we'll return with our Purdue Visitors Edition. My scheduled guest is the radio play-by-play voice of the Boilers, Tim Newton. On our Michigan Game Day show on Thursday, we hope to have Michigan great and current BTN color analyst Jake Butt with us. That will do it for now, though. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Hopefully we have better news to talk about next week. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go Blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!